in it. And in the wintertime, the drunks and the hobos off Washington Avenue would try and find a dime or beg a dime someplace and buy a ticket in the morning, and we'd open at 10 o'clock in the morning and run till midnight, and they'd buy a ticket for a dime and stay in there the whole day when it was cold outside. And that's how they kept warm in the wintertime.
God bless their hearts. God bless their hearts.
Yeah.
I'd recommend, if anybody hasn't seen on public TV, Channel 2, they run a show called Twin Cities Part 1 and 2 and 3. And it tells the history of Minneapolis. And it's very good, isn't it? Have you seen that?
Oh, yes.
Have you, Dave?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, it's very good. And it shows the hobos and the down and outs on Washington, and you know, it's kind of sad, but that's the way it was and how life was, and a lot of people just don't know how it used to be.
Yeah.
Dave, what can you tell me about your searchlights? Because you're one of a kind there. There are nobody running searchlights.
Well, I've got the old-fashioned. They're called 60-inch.
They're huge.
Yeah, and the light source is a carbon arc. It uses 2 electrodes jumping an arc, and you get a big flame on the top of the arc, and it's pretty bright, you know.
Oh, it is bright. And the name of your company again is what?
Hollywood Premier.
Hollywood Premier. Yeah, and I've been by your house, and all these searchlights. It's unbelievable. It's you just don't see them anymore. It's something that I bet
losing art.
Has any young kid ever stopped you and said, "What's all those? What is that?"
Yeah. I get asked that a lot.
Yeah. Bob, you were also in advertising, so being in the advertising business, then you would go working at the movie theaters at night?
I was working as a projectionist at night. I was working in advertising agencies during the daytime. And
when did you ever get home?
I wasn't home a lot, but I had a
good wife,
a good wife, and a growing and young family to raise. And one of the adventures of my life was working at the Lucky Twin Drive-In Theater out in Burnsville. And I worked out there for 12 or 13 years, and I'd be working out there till 2 and 3 in the morning, and then go home and catch a couple hours of sleep when I was down working at advertising agency, which in those days was Campbell Massoon. And I'd have to be down there at 8:30 in the morning, so didn't get a lot of sleep.
Well, when you're young and full of stamina, you can do it. When I lived in Florida for almost 4 years, I think I worked 7 days for 2 years straight, and I could, you know, hard to work a day now. But when you were in the advertising business, did you ever meet a lot of movie stars or any?
Occasionally, because sometimes we'd do promotions when a picture was opening up in town, and there would be visiting. Movie stars and stuff would come to town as part of the opening of the picture. And I was quite involved with the Advertising Club of Minnesota, and in that respect, we got involved with a lot of those promotions.
I see. Did you work with Bob on that or not? The advertising part of it?
No.
Oh.
No, I did not.
Okay. But were you ever outside the theater with a searchlight and he was on the inside showing a movie, or?
I believe I was, yeah.
You should have changed places. You should have run the searchlight.
That happened a few times when I was Mr. Inside and he was Mr. Outside.
Yeah, well, that's.
There used to be a couple of football players named that for Army.
Now, working at the Radio City Music Theater down there, when I was young, I'd go into the YMCA there, and sometimes we'd go over to the movie, or sometimes go on Hennepin Avenue around the corner and had to pick from 15 movie theaters. But that Radio City, that was a glamorous theater, wasn't it?
Well, an interesting part, a history of Radio City Music Hall. The Radio City Music Hall here, which was called the Minnesota, down in 9th and LaSalle, was an exact copy of the New York Paramount Theater.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it seated a little over 4,000 people.
Wow,
and
that's a big theater.
And the only real problem was it was a very successful theater in a lot of ways, but
Very
the big
elegant.
problem was that it had a poor location. 9th and LaSalle was off
Yes.
our so-called Hennepin Avenue theater row. And the location never did it any good.
Sure.
And eventually the auditorium part of the theater was torn down, and the entire main lobby section of the theater, which went down a whole half a block, became WCCO TV studios.
I see.
And that was where the original WCCO TV studios were. Was the lobby of the old Minnesota
Wow.
Theater.
I didn't
Yep.
know that.
Yep.
I grew up at the YMCA there across the
Yep,
street.
right there.
And we were there, us kids would take the bus down and go down every Saturday and spend
Yep.
the whole day there. And once in a while we'd go into the theaters, but unless you were with an adult, they really didn't like the little kids running through the theaters.
Not really, no.
Yeah, it was very elegant for people who don't know. And I would advise anybody who doesn't know this to look up some history and find some fun facts about the Twin Cities. The Radio City Music Hall was a great place.
Oh,
and
gorgeous
It
theater.
was, yeah.
Yeah, as I say, it
Huge
was a nice-
chandeliers and thick
Yep.
carpeting, and it went on forever. It stretched. You'd walk down the hallways, and
Yep.
you'd be just looking and being in awe. So it was a great place.
Yeah, as I
Yeah.
say, it was an exact copy of the New York Paramount.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yep.
And then we had also had a lot of drive-in movies. So all those had projectionists too, right? Besides the
yeah.
downtown theaters.
Yeah, yeah.
So could you take your choice of running a drive-in, or was that any
Yeah,
different than a
was,
theater?
a drive-in theater was no different than a regular theater. In other words, there was one or two projections working, not together, but
Sure.
splitting the hours. And if a drive-in opened, the union would put out bidding cards for that theater, and you'd submit your bid, and if you had the most seniority in the union, you'd get the job. And some of your drive-in theaters, for example, I worked the Lucky Twin West screen, and it had an East screen, so it was a dual drive-in theater.
Oh, sure.
And so there was an operator on each side, and I was the one on the West screen.
I used to go out there all the time. I went to 7 High Drive-In, 100 Twin. There were drive-ins all over the place, as there were movie theaters.
Right.
But nowadays, I don't even know. I think Cottage Grove has a drive-in.
Well, the biggest reason the demise of the drive-in theaters has been the rise in land costs.
Sure.
And some of your original drive-in owners, and including, for example, Krauss Anderson, for example, the big construction company, owned the Lucky Twin drive-in theater,
Oh, they did.
East and West screen.
Sure.
But the main reason that they were running the theaters was simply to pay the yearly taxes and everything else. And what they were really waiting for was for the land values to escalate and then sell the land for other purposes.
I can see that.
And that's exactly what happened in all of them. And, and they finally reached a point where inner city land values or close-in land values got too expensive to just run a part-time drive-in theater, because we had winter times. You could only run 4 or 5 months a year.
Sure.
And but the owners were happy if they just covered their yearly expenses while the land escalated in value, that they would then convert to something else.
Sure. Well, briefly touching on something, the France Avenue Drive-In. I was there on the opening night, and I was there on the closing night, and they billed that as the first drive-in with a balcony. And the reason that is because the land went hilly up, and then you could park and back, and you'd be...
I was there opening night too. And
You were in a different
well,
part of-
I wasn't working there, but I was there opening night to just take part in the opening.
Yeah.
And
I wish I would have known that.
Well, one of the interesting things about the France Avenue Drive-In, it was a former dump.
Yeah, right.
And for example, they in the middle of the drive-in, because you had two screens, east and west, and their big concession stand was in the very middle of the theater, between the
Sure.
screens, and the concession stand kept disappearing into the ground as the land compressed.
Yeah.
And they had to keep on patching the floor of the concession stand because it was sinking all the time
That's funny.
into the old dump.
That's funny. We're gonna leave at that, and I just want to thank you guys for joining me on Driveway Talk, and thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
You guys are old friends, and it's kind of nice to all be together. And thank you, Bob. Appreciate you coming on, and thank you, folks, for joining us for Driveway Talk, and we'll see you down the road.